steaming fog, until at last she broke through into the light, clear outer atmosphere. Stevens located the Titanian spaceship, and the two vessels once more hurtling together through the ether toward Titan, he turned to his companion. "Take the controls, will you, Nadia? Think I'll finish up the tube. I brought along a piece of platinum from the power plant, and something that I think is tantalum, from Barkov's description of it. With those, and the fractions we melted out, I think I can make everything we'll need." Now that he had comparatively pure metal with which to work, drawing the leads and filaments was relatively a simple task. Working over the hot bench with torch and welding projector, he made short work of running the leads through the almost plastic glass of the great tube, and of sealing them in place. The plates and grids presented more serious problems, but they were solved, and long before Titan was reached, the tube was out in space, supported by a titanium tractor beam between the two vessels. Stevens came into the shop, holding a modified McLeod gauge, which he had just taken from the interior of the tube. When it had come to equilibrium, he read it carefully, and yelled. "Eureka, little fellow! She's down to where I can't read it, even on this big gauge. So hard that it won't need flashing. Harder than any vacuum I ever got on Tellus, even with a Rodebush Maholic super pump." "But how about occluded and absorbed gas in the filaments and so on when they heat up?" demanded Nadia practically. "All gone, Ace. I outgassed 'em plenty out there, 7 times, almost to fusion. There isn't enough gas left in the whole thing to make a deep breath for a microbe." He took up his welding projector, and a beam carried him back to the tube. There, in the practically absolute vacuum of space, the last openings in the glass were sealed, and man and great transmitting tube were wafted lightly back into the terrestrial cruiser. Hour after hour, mirrored titanium sphere and crude-fashioned terrestrial wedge bore serenely on through space, and it was not until Titan loomed large beneath them that the calm was broken by an insistent call from Titan to the sphere. "Barkodar, attention! Barkodar, attention!" screamed from the speakers, and they heard Barkovus acknowledge the call. "The Sedlor have broken through and are marching upon Titania. The order has gone out for immediate mobilization of every unit." "There's that word Sedlor again. What are they anyway, Steve?" demanded Nadia. "I don't know. I was going to ask him when he sprung it on us first, but he was pretty busy then, and I haven't thought of it since. Something pretty serious, though. They've jumped their acceleration almost to Tellurian gravity, and none of them can live through much of that." "Tellurians," came the voice of Barkovus from the speaker, "we have just—" "All X, we were on your wave and heard it," interrupted Stevens. "We're with you. What are those Sedlor anyway? Maybe we can help you dope out something." "Perhaps, but whatever you do, do not use your heat projector. That would start a conflagration raging over the whole country, and we shall have enough to do without fighting fire. But it may be that you have other weapons of which we are ignorant, and I can use a little time in explanation before we arrive. The Sedlor are a form of life, something like your—" He paused, searching through his scanty store of earthly knowledge, then went on, doubtfully. "Perhaps something like your insects. They developed a sort of intelligence, and because of their fecundity, adapted themselves to their environment as readily as did man, and for ages they threatened man's supremacy upon Titan. They devoured vegetation, crops, animals, and mankind. After a worldwide campaign, however, they were finally exterminated, save in the neighborhood of one great volcanic crater, which they so honeycombed that it is almost impregnable. All around that district we have erected barriers of force, maintained by a corps of men known as Guardians of the Sedlor. These barriers extend so far into the ground and so high into the air that the Sedlor can neither burrow beneath them nor fly over them. They were being advanced as rapidly as possible, and in a few more years the insects would have been destroyed completely, but now they are again at large, They have probably developed an armor or a natural resistance greater than the Guardians thought possible, so that when the walls were weakened, they came through in their millions, underground and undetected. They are now attacking our nearest city, the one you know, and which you have called Titania." "What do you use? Those high-explosive bombs?" "The bombs were developed principally for use against them, but proved worse than useless, for we found that when a settlor was blown to pieces, each piece forthwith developed into a new, complete creature. Our most efficient weapons are our heat rays, not yours, remember, and poison gas. I must prepare our arms." "Would our heat ray actually set them afire, Steve?" Nadia asked, as the plate went blank. "I'll say it would. I'll show you what heat means to them. Showing you will be plainer than any amount of explanation." And he shot the visiray beam down toward the city of Titania. Into a low-lying building it went, and Nadia saw a Titanian foundry in full operation. Men clad in asbestos armor were charging, tending, and tapping great electric furnaces and crucibles, shrinking back and turning their armored heads away as the hissing, smoking melt crackled into molds from their long-handled ladles. Nadia studied the foundry for a moment, interested but unimpressed. "Of course it's hot there. Foundries always are hot," she argued. "Yes, but you haven't got the idea yet." Stevens turned again to the controls, following the sphere toward what was evidently a line of battle. "That stuff that they are melting and casting, and that is so hot, is not metal, but ice. Remember that the vital fluid of all life here, animal and vegetable, corresponding to our water, is probably more inflammable than gasoline. If they can't work on ice water without wearing suits of 5-ply asbestos, what would a real heat ray do to them? It'd be about like our taking a dive into the sun." "Ice?" she exclaimed. "Oh, of course. But you couldn't really believe a thing like that without seeing it, could you? Oh, Steve, how utterly horrible." The Barkodar had dropped down into a line of sister ships, and had gone into action in mid-air against a veritable swarm of foes. Winged centipedes they were, centipedes fully 6 feet long, hurling themselves along the ground and through the air in furious hordes. From the flying globes emanated pale beams of force, at the touch of which the Sedlord disappeared in puffs of vapor. Upon the ground huge tractors and trucks, manned by massed soldiery, mounted mighty reflectors projecting the same lethal beam. From globes and tanks there sounded a drumming roar, and small capsules broke in thousands among the foe, emitting a red cloud of gas in which the centipedes shriveled and died. But for each one that was destroyed, 2 came up from holes in the ground, and the battle line fell back toward Titania, back toward a long line of derrick-like structures which were sinking force rods into the ground in furious haste. Stevens flashed on his ultraviolet projector and swung it into the thickest ranks of the enemy. In the beam, many of the monsters died, but the terrestrial ray was impotent compared with the weapons of the Titanians, and Stevens, snapping off the beam with a bitter imprecation, shot the visiray out toward the bare black cone of the extinct volcano and studied it with care. "Barkovas, I've got a thought," he snapped into the microphone. "Their stronghold is in that mountain, and there's millions of them in there yet, coming out along their tunnels. They've got all the vegetation eaten away for miles, so there's nothing much left there to spread a fire if I go to work on that hill, and I'll probably melt enough water to put out most of the fires I start. Detail me a couple of ships to drop your fire foam bombs on any little blazes that may spread, and I'll give them so much to worry about at home that they'll forget all about Titania." The forlorn hope darted toward the crater, followed closely by 2 of the dazzling globes. They circled the mountain until Stevens found a favorable point of attack, a stupendous vertical cliff of mingled rock and crystal, upon the base of which he trained his terrific infrared projector. "I'm going to draw a lot of power," he warned the Titanians then. "I'm giving this gun everything